Good evening. First of all, I'd like to thank Wesley for covering for me last Wednesday night. I actually listened to him during the baccalaureate service. I actually watched most of the service during that part of that baccalaureate service. I didn't listen to it. I just watched it a little bit to make sure it was streaming okay. But thank you for Wesley for stepping in, and for those others that step in occasionally when some of us aren't here and they do something that they're not used to doing. It's good to know that we can have people step up, and we talk about during the song leaders all the time. Men, just step up here and do it, and it gets done, and it gets done very well. So thank y'all for the assistance and the help out when people aren't here. Tonight we got a few people to remember in our prayers. We still need to continue to remember David Taylor. That's Lee Glawson's brother-in-law that had the spinal surgery. Houston Cole, any updates on Mr. Cole?
Yes, he's going to rehab,
So doing some better? Okay. Miss Judy Millsaps, that's Jamie Williams' aunt. She is still in need of prayer. She's not doing very well, so please remember her. Remember Marty Broom, Natasha Pope. Has anybody heard any updates on Natasha? Kelly and Kelly are not here, so they would know, I think. Let's remember Natasha. I'll try to get an update for Sunday on her. Sandy Taylor, Lee Glawson's sister. She broke her ankle in a couple of places a couple of weeks ago. Remember her as she recovers from that. Kathy Lovern will be having a heart cath tomorrow. Remember her as she prepares for that. Ken is not feeling well. He's home not feeling well tonight, so remember him. Sawyer Teal had his surgery yesterday. It went well, so remember him as he recovers, and the family that they're taking care of him at this point. But I saw a few pictures on Facebook. He was smiling and happy and coloring, so that's a good sign. So remember little Sawyer as he recovers. Also, Mike Patton's not feeling well tonight. His allergies got him down. Robin said he's struggling, so keep him in our prayers as well. Are there any others new prayers tonight that we need to add to our list? Okay.
They still have not determined what this situation is.
Okay.
He is going to a neurologist in another town,
Okay.
another hospital. I'm not sure, so they can't pinpoint what's causing it.
Okay. That's Marty Broom. Still not real sure what's going on with him, so let's continue to remember him in our prayers so they can figure out what's going on with him and try to get him fixed. So remember Marty. Any others? Good. We were able to take Marcella Dorsey off of our COVID list. That's great news. I talked to Scott Sunday. He said Ken Ross is getting a little bit better, so that's good news as well. He says he can't talk right now, but he's able to text people, so he's communicating a little bit. Scott said he texted him one day last week, so that's good news for Ken to start on his journey to recovery. And also Joey Hunt, Robin's cousin's still doing okay? Good, okay. All right. Any others that y'all know of may have COVID or anything relating to that? Good. Good news on that. So hopefully these two will get well and we can get those guys off the list and go on with our normals. All right. MEP team number 1 will sign cards only this coming Sunday. This is June the 6th. Due to VBS, we'll just sign cards briefly and take care of that. So if you have a card or a note that needs to be sent, get it to Jerome or myself and we'll get that taken care of Sunday. I talked to Jamie about the Pregnancy Resource Center. She wants to just keep doing the same thing, size 1 diapers and newborn diapers, due to the need of those at this time. So for June, we're still going to do the same thing for June. Newborn diapers and size 1 diapers and gender neutral blankets. So let's keep that going for June for now. VBS, it will be here Sunday. Like Josh said, there's going to be some crazy looking animals in here Sunday afternoon. So in regards to VBS, if you have any last minute questions, get with Wesley this evening if you need to. Teachers, if you got any questions, don't forget the drinks and the snacks. We still are in need of several more. Okay. If you still have some sitting in the pantry, go ahead and bring them. And if we don't use them, we'll take them back home or use them for something else. So if you got that stuff, go ahead and bring it. And hopefully Dana can take an inventory before Sunday morning. If we need something extra, we can grab it if we need it during the week. So keeping that in mind. Camp Inagahe's coming up, June 20th through 25th. I hope everybody's ready. I know my two are. They enjoy that week very much, so anybody else that'll be going, that's great. I think you two guys are going this year, so that's good. You know, hope they'll have fun out there that week, so it's always, I bet you do. I remember the skit you did where you had the fire burning on the bowl and got somebody's smut all over their face that night. Okay, if Bud's ever got a fire, y'all be careful. Some more information about VBS. For the teachers and staff, just like last year with their families, there'll be supper provided Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. So keep that in mind. Wesley will have that for us, and that'll be, what time, Wesley? 5:30. So if you're a teacher or staff, you'll have supper provided for you and your family at 5:30 Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. Yes, sir.
If you remind everyone, we got to have the pews cleaned off Sunday.
Yeah, okay. Clean off the pews. I think we've started collecting stuff since our COVID time, so clean off the pews, especially this rows here, mainly back to about Gary. We'll get those cleaned off and be ready to go for the VBS. Let's see, Bible class work day, this quarter will be June the 13th, and that morning, following morning service, Wesley is providing a low country boil. So that'll be our lunch for the day, and again, let's bring snacks and desserts, drinks and desserts for that. He said he would take care of the bowl, so we'll hold up on the, okay. All right. We gotta have sweet tea though. Gotta have sweet tea with low country bowl. Okay, I'll take care of the tea. So desserts, hold off on the drinks till after VBS. Okay, perfect. June 19th is planned to be a 12 and under Devo, and it'll be at the Safari Park in Carrollton on North Park Street. Have more times with that, times to be there will be coming soon. But June 19th, Saturday, 12 and under Youth Devo at Safari Park in Carrollton on North Park Street, going towards the Chevrolet place up there in Carrollton up by Ingalls. We're going that way. I don't know if there's an address to that place or not, but I think everybody may know. If you don't know where it is, let me know and I'll tell you. It's pretty easy. And let's see, that is all that I had. Does anybody have anything else that we need to discuss in reference to the week or coming events or anything going on? Okay. All right. Well, if nothing more, Gerald, would you dismiss us, sir?
Father, we come to you tonight, we're thankful for you spared our lives. We're thankful for every blessing that you bestow upon us. We know that we're blessed more than we deserve. We pray tonight that the lesson that Josh has brought to us has been encouraging to us. We pray that as we go to our classes, that we'll be encouraged even more from the studies. We pray for all that were mentioned tonight as being sick and those that have been recovering for such a long time, and soon they will be back to a portion of life that's suitable to them. Ask you to be with us through the week as we prepare for Vacation Bible School, and that each and every one that works on it will do so with a plan to make it a successful one. Pray that you be with us through the rest of the night. Heaven save us. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Good. We're gonna hit that one. And we're just gonna let it be. You good? Here, I'll fix that. You good? You can go to class. Come on, Josh. Use your brain, dude. All right, there we go. All right, it's good to see everybody tonight. I don't know if y'all can feel it, but man, I feel VBS in the air. It is on us. I love Vacation Bible School. Yeah, man. We used to, when I was growing up, yeah, they would rent a soda fountain. And on Vacation Bible School week, I always would say, Dad, can I go to work with you? And I'd slip back to the fellowship hall, and I tore up that soda fountain. So I don't know. I've just always really enjoyed VBS. It wasn't the soda fountain necessarily, but it's just the beginning of the summer, and kids are getting out, and this is just an awesome time of the year. All right, Dad taught on Sunday, and then I will teach tonight and next Sunday, and then Wednesday will be VBS. So we've only got, after today, 6 classes left in this quarter, which means, as typical fashion when I do it, I use all my time up at the beginning and then never have time to finish at the end. So we're just going to have to kind of skip around, and study a few things that would be maybe varying. We won't be able to hit every card, but I do want to hit some of the high points. So open up to Acts chapter 8, and that's where we're going to pick up. Acts chapter 8. Now, when we studied last, we left off at Acts chapter 2. And, Acts chapter 2 is all about the resurrection and Jesus' effect for our lives because of the resurrection. And I gave y'all that Eric Lyons video to watch that Wednesday night. And he covered some of the alleged problems with the resurrection. I just really enjoyed that video, so I wanted y'all to watch it too. I wanted to talk about the resurrection more, but just didn't have time in class, so I thought that video was a good way to do that. So we left off in Acts chapter 2. Now, geographically, in the book of Acts, we jump to Acts chapter 8, which is a very large leap, to say the least. But Acts chapter 8 is the next geographical event that takes place. And so just to kind of give you a little context, Acts chapter 2 to Acts chapter 8, span of probably what scholars believe to be about 1.5 to 2 years. So going from the day of Pentecost to where we're going to pick up with a man named Philip, pretty significant piece of time. And you're going to see some large chunks of time begin to etch out as we go through the book of Acts. Because, of course, remember, the book of Acts, while it may be right after the Gospels, the book of Acts spans the entirety of the New Testament beyond. So everything that you see in the book of Acts, it happened somewhere, like the letter was written somewhere in that book. And so I gave you a chart in your map thing that I passed out at the beginning, a chart that uses the book of Acts timeline, and it tells you when certain books were written during the book of Acts and all that kind of stuff. This chart mainly focuses on Paul's letters, so you're going to see some of Paul's movement through the book of Acts. So it starts at chapter 9, but you'll see in Acts chapter 13, that's when they believe Paul wrote the book of Galatians. You get down to Acts 16 and 17 and 18, Paul's writing 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. You get down to Acts 19 and 20 and 21, he's writing 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans. And you can follow how those books were written through the book of Acts, which I like. I work on a timeline. That makes the New Testament make a lot more sense to me. So the book of Acts, it's not just like a book that falls in sequential order with the rest of them as far as time is concerned. The book of Acts is the rest of what we know about the New Testament church, okay, from at least an inspired perspective. And all of those letters drop in and fit somewhere in that book of Acts. And so that chart is on page 14 in your little map booklet, okay? And the whole reason I bring that up is just to say, as we move through the book of Acts, we're jumping large chunks of time. Where we were studying the ministry of Jesus, that's all kind of crammed within 3 years. The book of Acts is jumping some pretty big chunks of time. So Acts chapter 2 to Acts chapter 8, I read everywhere from 1.5 to 3 years, but most people said 1.5 to 2 years. Okay. So you've got all these events that take place. And you find yourself in Acts chapter 8. Okay? Now, what has happened right before this? You remember Stephen, who was one of the chosen, some people say he was one of the first deacons. Now, there's some debate about whether the men in Acts chapter 6 were actual literal deacons, okay? And maybe at another time we could talk about those arguments on either side. But he's one of the men chosen in Acts chapter 6 to watch over the widows. They were being ignored, which kind of gives you a picture of what a deacon is. But then in Acts chapter 7, what we read tonight, Stephen makes his defense. Hey, this is why I say what I say, because you Jews have basically hypocritically gone back on the law of God. Just like the people before you, you're just as stiff-necked. You resist the Spirit of God just the same as they did. And, of course, as we talked about tonight, they killed him for that. Now, if you'll remember, at the end of Acts chapter 7, who do they lay the garments at the feet of when they're about to stone Stephen? Saul, right? A young man named Saul who became the Apostle Paul. Okay, a lot of stuff that I read said that the laying down of those garments meant that he was almost like a head honcho there. Like he gave the approval for things to happen. Don't know necessarily. There's nothing in the Bible to really indicate that, except for some things that Paul himself says, that he consented to the death of Stephen. At least he threw his vote in. But Saul was there with Stephen. Now, immediately after that, Saul lays into the church. You see that in Acts chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. Saul approved of his execution, and there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem. Now, this is where our geography is going to be important, and why I've brought all this up. Because in Acts chapter 8, when Saul starts persecuting the church, they start scattering everywhere. The church just spreads all over the place, and they run to all different areas. One of those places that they ran, if you'll look in Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, the persecution against the church in Jerusalem arose, and they were scattered all throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So the church spread out from Jerusalem to the Judean area and then went up to the Samaritan area right above it. And if you'll remember your map, I think I have one that's just right here. You'll have Jerusalem here in the middle. They went out to these outer Judean areas and then up to Samaria. Okay, so the church is spreading out in different directions. Acts chapter 8 and verse 1. So they bury Stephen, and Saul in verse 3 was ravaging the church. He was entering house after house and dragging off men and women and committed them to prison. Okay, now verse 4. Those who were scattered went about preaching the word. Philip went down to the city of Samaria. Now remind me, I know you know this, why does it say he went down when he went north? Right, he's descending in elevation, right? Coming down from Jerusalem to Samaria. He goes down to the city of Samaria, and that's where he begins to proclaim Christ. So you see, cards 31, 32, and 33 are all about Stephen. And when Stephen goes to Samaria, he goes and begins to preach. Okay, that's card number 31, I believe. Acts chapter 8 and verse 5. Philip went to the city, down to the city of Samaria, and he proclaimed to them Christ. Okay, all these things take place. Then you have kind of a break in there where we meet a man by the name of Simon who tried, you remember, to buy the gift of the Holy Spirit. And then you get to verse 26. Now, while Simon was preaching in Samaria, okay, an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise, go south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza." So this is actually a map that depicts Philip's movements here on the screen. So he goes down from Samaria to Jerusalem and then down to this road, which is called a desert road. Some translations use that word, or deserted road. And he meets a man who is a what? What is this man? He's a country redneck. No. All right, but just making sure y'all are awake. He's an Ethiopian eunuch, right? Now, somebody tell me, what color would he have been if he was an Ethiopian? He would have been black. He would have been, one gentleman at Lineville used to say, he was just a darker shade of brown. Yeah, he said, we're all brown. I'm just a lighter shade of brown than you are. That's what he said. Now, take that how you will. he was a black man. He was from Ethiopia. Now, I know that he lives in Ethiopia, and some people have supposed that he was a Jew that went down there, but he is called an Ethiopian. So I would assume he's a man from Ethiopia. Like that's what I'm assuming. And he's a man who is a eunuch. Now, a eunuch is just a man who serves in such a way that he is castrated so he's not tempted to, engage in any sexual activity with anybody else he's serving with. Most men are made eunuchs for that particular purpose. It seems that's the case. He served for Candace, but he was a converted Jew. We call that in the New Testament a proselyte. So he's come up to Jerusalem to worship, and he's coming back. Now, I don't know where he got the scroll of Isaiah, okay, but that's what he has. Maybe it's hard to kind of picture these things because when you look at history, like the scrolls were very specifically reserved for the synagogue. And you had to be very wealthy to own one because, hand copying by a professional a scroll on paper that would have been very hard to manage and keep up with be a pretty difficult task. Okay, but we know he has Isaiah with him because that's what he's reading from. So, when I first began to study this, I thought, did they sell scrolls as souvenirs? How did he get his hand on one? But he probably had to be a man that was very wealthy, or at least the woman he served with, Candace, was wealthy enough to have some of the Hebrew law. But he had the prophets here. He had Isaiah, and he was reading from it. Okay, somebody tell me what happens when Philip comes up to this man. What are some of the sequential events that take place when Philip comes up to the eunuch?
Philip asked him, could he understand what he's reading?
All right. Important question, right? Do you know what you're reading? That is in verse 30. Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and said, "Do you understand what you are reading?" That is the English Standard. Okay? The Ethiopian eunuch is a smart man because he says, well, how can I unless someone guides me? So he invited Philip to come up and sat with him. And does anybody remember, some passages use this, some do not. What translation, I think it's the King James or the New King James, that says, beginning at this passage, he preached to him what? Jesus, right. He began to lay out to him who Jesus was. Pretty simple thing to do from Isaiah. You get to Isaiah 53, which is what is quoted here in Acts chapter 8. Pretty easy to talk about Jesus from that. Hindsight being 20/20. And so he begins to talk about Jesus and who he was. Okay? Verse 34, Philip was asked by the eunuch, about whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this? About himself or about someone else? Right? Philip, being an inspired man, hindsight being 20/20, as we said, looks back and says, beginning with this, it's verse 35, preached to him Jesus, and they came up to water, and the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What prevents me from being baptized?" All right, what's the implication here?
He preaches to Jesus, he preached to him.
Okay, somewhere along the way, when talking about Jesus, we get to baptism, right? That's the implication we have to draw. Obviously, beyond that, getting up to that point, it seems important that baptism was something necessary that needed to be done quite immediately. They came up to water, and he says, all right, well, from what you've told me, here's water. Is there anything that holds me back or prevents me from doing this? And of course, this is one of the downfalls, if you have an English Standard Version in front of you, this is one of the downfalls of a modern translation. The ESV does not include verse 37. Now, that's based on a number of texts that have been found, specifically like text bodies they have uncovered that didn't have this verse in it. Having this verse and not having this verse does not change any doctrine in the Bible, but if it belongs there, it belongs there, and we should respect that, and I believe God probably intended for us to be able to know this in some way. So verse 37, oftentimes, at least in my ESV, you'll see is put at the bottom in italics. It's right there. So it's still included in there, but not completely taken out. Nonetheless, I still don't like that it's taken out, so I'll just voice my opinion about that. We'll talk about this Sunday. Every translation has its problems, so that's just what it is. It's a translation. But verse 37 If you believe with all your heart, you may. And he replied, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Okay? Plenty of other places in the Bible, if you didn't have this verse, still teach that you have to believe in your heart that Jesus is the Son of God. Romans 10 being a proof text for that, and many others. So he takes him down in the water, and he baptizes him. Okay? I remember meeting someone that developed a very interesting doctrine out of this. They believed that it was a sin when someone's baptized if both people aren't in the water because of this particular text, because it says they both went down into the water and they both came back out. Pretty close inference that we make in other places. The reason they brought that up is because there was a group that baptized people. They purchased a baptistry, but they didn't have the funds to build a deck around it. And so they, for a summer, it was a church camp, they stood outside of the baptistry, and the baptistry just sat on the ground, and they just baptized people that way. Right? They built the deck later around it. But a man said that the whole church camp was going to hell because they stood on the outside of the baptistry. And that came out of this. There's a lot of information in here about baptism. I think probably the most substantial statement in Acts chapter 8 was that they went down into the water. And there's been a lot of people who have written articles and preached sermons about, this road right here. Okay, if you look at is it a topographical map that shows like the climate and the the ridges and the elevation, right? If you look at this area in a map that depicts climate, that is brown. I mean, it is desert. It looks like it would be, I get thirsty just looking at it, okay? And a lot of people believe that that's what that word means in the text, that it was a deserted road or it was a desert road, been pretty wanting for water, which means that the eunuch probably would have had water with him. He was in charge of the whole treasury of a queen. He would have had other people with him. He would have had horses. We know that because he's on a chariot. He had to have water with him, okay? So the implication that they got out of the chariot that probably housed water and went down into a body of water is pretty important, right? To add to that, Anon, which is kind of in this area where John the Baptist preached, he preached there because there was much water there, which was already one of our cards. Is it already 7:50? Okay. Confessing. Yeah, it's that confession, right? So that's an additional statement here that when we talk about confession in salvation, confession is not a confession of sin, it's a confession of Jesus. That's an important distinction. We have to confess Jesus before others. All right. Any other comments on the Philip and the eunuch?
Did the eunuch ever see Philip again, period, or was that it?
I don't know. We won't read about the eunuch anymore. There's a lot of question about who this Philip was, too. So that depends on where he ended up. Some people believe that this Philip may be a completely different Philip from other Philips mentioned in the Bible. Jesus had an apostle named Philip that brought Nathanael to Jesus, and there's a lot of different Philips mentioned. So, but we don't know any more about the eunuch. So we don't know where Philip ultimately, at the end of the book of Acts, ends up. We know where a Philip ends up in chapter 21, but we don't know where, if it's this Philip, that's kind of some of the downfall when you have a lot of characters in the Bible. Names are interchangeable.
Why did you say that 37 was not in all?
So basically when, so when the King James Version was written, 1611, the original King James, there have been mountains of discoveries of ancient texts since then. And actually, they've discovered texts that were earlier, that were closer to when these letters were written. And in some texts, verse 37 just isn't there, okay? In some texts, it is. What they believe is that maybe as time progressed, scribes were adding this doctrine in there. What they believed, if I understand the way a scribe worked right, a scribe would make notes on the side of a scroll to explain things. So the Apostle John did this in his own writings. You remember in the Gospel of John, he would in your text, you probably have parentheses where it's like an explanation of what's going on. Like when John records that Jesus said, I'll tear this temple down in 3 days and rebuild it, you've kind of got this parenthetical statement in there. He said this about his own body. John explains what he meant. And so a lot of people believe that the scribes would write notes that would ultimately be incorporated into the original text. I don't really like that explanation. I don't think that really suffices. If you study the scribes, they seem to be very disciplined characters. And so probably what happened is there are some texts that don't have it, and because they found earlier texts that don't have verse 37, they said, well, if verse 37 isn't in these earliest texts, I mean, it's just like a witness testimony you take at a crime scene. Like, the person who is 5 feet away from the crime may have a more reliable translation or a reliable account than the man that was, a quarter mile from the crime or the car wreck, right? So the closeness of the testimony makes a difference. So a lot of the earlier manuscripts that they found didn't have verse 37 in it, and so the translators of the ESV decided to footnote it and say some translations don't include this. And when you really start studying the bodies of text, you have all these different sections of texts that have been found. They're like family groups. You've got the Alexandrian texts and so on and so forth. And so all those are divided out. The King James was based on texts that we now have tons more earlier ones. So a lot of the modern translations are based on those earlier texts.
In verse 36 is asking a question.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If you jump 37, what hinders me to be baptized? And he commanded the chariot to stand still. And so
There's no answer to that question. Hey, that's a pretty good point, right? So the narrative makes more sense with verse 37.
If a question like that was asked, there was an answer. It may have been an answer in the form of a question, but there was an answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. The narrative does make more sense with verse 37. Again, when you get into what is a discussion or a study of textual variants, which is what this is, how the texts that we have discovered vary, there's not a single textual variant that destroys any doctrine in the Bible. Okay, like some people believe that the end of Mark 16 does not belong in the Bible, like the last half of the chapter. Well, you read the end of Mark 16, everything that's talked about in that chapter is spoken of in other places. Like, you don't have to have that verse to make anything make sense. It's the same with verse 37. If it were the case that somehow verse 37 was added in there, right? You don't have to have verse 37 because that doctrine is mentioned everywhere else in the Bible. The idea that confessing Jesus as the Son of God is important is not something that is just mentioned in Acts 8:37. So, again, a textual variant doesn't destroy the credibility of any narrative text because all these other things are put other places. Right? So if there was a textual variant that said like the horsemen in the book of Revelation, were added later, okay, well, that's a different story. That's the only place we really read about these particular horsemen. But these things, I mean, they're constant doctrines mentioned throughout the Bible. Okay? So that's Acts chapter 8. Let's move on to cards 34 and 35, which talk about Saul. So as the church was growing, Saul's persecution was also growing. And in chapter 9 of the book of Acts, verse 1, Saul begins to outreach his persecution, and he's expanding his territory, if you will. What you see on the screen, this is not a map that I included in your packet, but this is just like a zoomed-in portion of the travels of Paul before he became a Christian and then before he started his missionary journeys. And so what you'll see is Paul went up from Jerusalem to Damascus. He's on the road to Damascus to take Christians and to put them in prison when he is blinded by that light on the road. The light being the presence of God. One of the reasons that qualifies Paul as an apostle is because he saw Jesus on the road to Damascus. He says, "Lord, who are you?" And he says, "I'm Jesus of Nazareth whom you persecute." Tells him to go into the city. Tells him he'll be told what he needs to do. He goes into the city, and 3 days without food, without water, no drink, okay, and with no sight, he spends in Damascus. 3 days. Now, all of us need alone time. Even, I know that I say this because Sidon told me this the other day. He said, "Dad, I just need to be alone." And I was like, man, you have heard that somewhere. And he's right, I do. Like, I'm the type of person, I can be around people for a very long time, but eventually it just exhausts me, and I just need to decompress a little bit. Probably some of you are this way. To decompress for an hour or so is one thing, okay? I I don't know how many of you have ever practiced fasting, and that's not necessarily what I intend this class to discuss. There's no New Testament command for Christians to fast, not as a congregation or as individuals. The example is given throughout the Bible. It's not wrong to fast. It's not wrong not to fast. Fasting was fundamental to people's relationship with God for a long time, and it is a very beneficial practice. There's something that happens when you fast, if you study it, that once you get past day number 1 and those initial hunger pains are gone, they just kind of go away. Like, you know you're still hungry, but the hunger isn't as strong as it once was on day 1. Day 2, day 3 roll around. I mean, you can really focus your mind because you're not worried about eating. Because if you think about it, everything you and I do focuses around what we eat and when we eat, right? Everything. Vacation is that way. You're just sleeping in a different bed and eating different food. That's all it is, okay? Everything we do centers around eating. When you take that out, you got a lot more focus. Now, take out eating, take out drinking, take out your eyesight. After a first couple of hours, that solitude is going to begin to get to you. After a day, you're really going to start doing some self-reflection. Probably wouldn't be a bad practice for many of us to disconnect from everything for a little while and just be away from all of it. The news, from the problems, from the drama, even from other people, and just to be on our own. Paul did that, and he did some self-reflection. Of course, I believe that God intended to leave him for 3 days. Why God left him for 3 days, I don't know. I think he was having to make some really considerable decisions. And we'll talk about this some more on Sunday morning. But Paul gave up more than just his position as a Pharisee. Okay? He was a Jew of Jews. There would have been family that he would have given up. There would have been money that he would have given up. Remember, the Pharisees were not poor people. He would have given up a lot. And I've always said any person that makes a hasty decision that is life-changing really quickly is not somebody you can really trust. Because you need to think about decisions before you make them. Maybe that's why God left Paul there for 3 days without that. I don't know. Because I know God came to Ananias. I know he could have had him there that day. He was just in Damascus, right? But he gave him a couple of days. We'll talk about that some more on Sunday morning. All right, any comments, questions, concerns, grievances? You can express them if you'd like. Okay. We'll talk some more about Saul, and then we'll get into Peter and some of Peter's racist tendencies on Sunday morning towards the Gentiles. All right. Thank you all for your attention.